You can't even walk up the stairs, Mom. How do you expect to survive in another country? That's what my daughter told me the night I announced I was going to travel the world. Her words weren't cruel on the surface, but the message was clear. I wasn't capable, I wasn't strong, I was a burden. My name is Judith. I'm 72 years old, and until that moment, I truly believed my family cared about more than just keeping me safe. I thought they saw me as a person with dreams, memories, desires. But over the years, I had slowly disappeared in my own house. My opinions were brushed off, my movements were questioned. Even my mail was filtered just in case there was something confusing. Last year, after I slipped on the porch, they installed cameras. Just for your safety, they said. But the truth was, every move I made was monitored, every phone call overheard. They even put my passport in a locked cabinet after they helped me clean up the clutter. They meant well, I think. But when you treat someone like they're breakable, eventually they start to believe it too. Until I saw it. One night, alone in my room, I found an old photo album buried in the bottom of a box they forgot to sort. There I was, 26 years old, on a boat in Thailand, smiling so wide my cheeks hurt just looking at it. Another one climbing a dusty cliff in Peru, then India, Italy, Egypt, and then I realized something. I wasn't born fragile. They made me feel that way. So I made a decision, one they'd never see coming. I would go around the world again, alone, with nothing but a backpack, my walking cane, and that old photo album. The next morning, I booked a one-way ticket to Lisbon. Didn't tell anyone. If they thought I couldn't do it, well, just wait till they saw where I sent the postcards from. I wasn't always fragile. There was a time when I worked 2 jobs, came home, cooked dinner, and still managed to be the loudest cheerleader in the bleachers for my kids' school events. After my husband died in a car accident when I was 39, I had no choice but to figure it out alone. I was suddenly a single mother of 2. Sarah was 13 and Kevin just 9. There was no life insurance payout, no magical safety net. Just me, 2 kids, and a house that always seemed a few steps away from falling apart. I worked as a librarian during the day and cleaned medical offices at night. I sold my wedding ring to buy a second-hand car so I could get to both jobs without missing a shift. I missed birthdays, recitals, sleep, but I never let my kids feel it. I never remarried, not because no one asked, but because I didn't want to split my time, energy, or heart. My children came first. Always. That was the deal I made with myself. And in many ways, it paid off. Sarah became a nurse. Kevin studied engineering. They both got scholarships. They left home, built lives, started families. And when they needed help watching their little ones, I was there, diaper bag in hand, knees aching, but heart full. But somewhere along the way, the roles quietly reversed. It started small. Sarah began calling. Every morning. At first it felt sweet, thoughtful even. Just checking in, Mom. But soon it became, did you take your pills? Don't forget your appointment today. Are you eating too much sugar again? Kevin installed a smart thermostat so he could help regulate the temperature remotely. Then came the video doorbell, then motion sensors, then the side eye. Every time I talked about traveling or going out alone, what they called care slowly became control. I was grateful, of course, but I also started to feel erased. My days became a loop of doctor's visits, daytime television, and waiting for someone else to decide what I needed. I rarely made my own grocery list. My driver's license was quietly taken, just for now, until you feel steadier. And when I brought up wanting to visit an old friend in Oregon, "Oh, Mom," Sarah said with a sigh, "you can't travel by yourself anymore. Be realistic." It stung because I didn't see myself as helpless, but somehow over time they did. I'd mention wanting to go back to Greece, where I'd spent a summer in my 20s, and Kevin would change the subject. I'd say I felt strong enough to walk to the park alone, and Sarah would remind me about my blood pressure. Even the neighbors, who once called me that firecracker grandma, now spoke in tones reserved for delicate things. "She's doing so well for her age," they'd whisper, as if I weren't standing right there. The irony was, for all their good intentions, I felt lonelier and less seen than ever until the day I found the photos. I was cleaning out a box of winter scarves when I saw it, my old leather-bound travel album, dusty but intact. Inside were moments I'd nearly forgotten. My smile beaming against the backdrop of the Eiffel Tower. My hair windblown on a camel ride through Morocco. My laugh frozen in time on a kayak in New Zealand. Every photo felt like a message from my past self. You were bold. You were brave. You were alive. I closed the album and held it to my chest. Somewhere along the line, I had stopped living and started waiting for what I wasn't even sure. But now something had woken up in me. That night, I opened my laptop, created a brand new email account, one I didn't share with my kids, and started researching senior travel groups, hostels with elevators, and walking tours that included rest stops. I read travel blogs written by 80-year-olds who hiked solo, swam in oceans, danced in festivals. Suddenly, I wasn't alone. I wasn't crazy. And I definitely wasn't done. I kept it all a secret, not out of spite, but to protect that little flicker of rebellion inside me that was finally growing again. Let them think I was fragile. Let them believe I was content. They had no idea that Judith Pearson was just getting started. It didn't happen all at once. The shift was gradual, like tiny hairline cracks forming in glass. At first, they're harmless, barely visible. But over time, they spread, and one day everything just shatters. For a while, I convinced myself it was love, concern. My children had their own families, after all. I couldn't expect to be the center of their world forever. I told myself that when Sarah rushed my phone calls or Kevin skipped Sunday visits, it was just life. But the truth was harder to swallow. It started with my birthday, my 71st. I had baked a lemon cake, my favorite, and set out the good tea set. I even wore lipstick. I waited all afternoon. When they finally showed up an hour late, they brought store-bought cupcakes and takeout containers. "No time to cook, Mom. We've just been so slammed," Sarah said, sliding her phone into her purse, barely glancing at me. Kevin was glued to his smartwatch the whole time. My grandkids played on their tablets, never looking up. They didn't even notice the cake. I ended up slicing it alone that night and ate a piece in the dark kitchen. The candle still melted down into the frosting. Later that week, I overheard Sarah talking to her husband on the phone. She didn't know I was walking down the hallway. "I just don't know how much longer we can keep managing her stuff. It's like having a third kid." A third kid. I stood there frozen. It wasn't just the words, it was the tone. Exhausted. Burdened. Like I was some obligation she was stuck with. After that, things began to feel different. Kevin started handling my bills. At first, I was grateful. He said it was easier that way, less for me to worry about. But then one day, I noticed something strange. He canceled my magazine subscriptions without asking, cut off my Netflix, and downgraded my phone plan. When I asked him why, he shrugged. "You don't really need those things anymore, do you?" Sarah, meanwhile, took over my medical appointments. She'd speak to the doctors like I wasn't even in the room. Every time I asked about changing a medication or trying something new, she'd shoot me a look. "Don't start. You're not as sharp as you used to be, Mom," she said once after I asked the same question twice. "It's okay. That's just how it is." No one meant to be cruel. That was the hardest part. It wasn't slamming doors or raised voices. It was polite dismissal, constant correction, soft smiling control, the kind that wears you down until you start to doubt yourself. One day, I mentioned a travel documentary I'd seen. I got so excited describing the lavender fields of Provence that I said, half joking, I should go see them again before I forget what they smell like. Kevin laughed, not kindly. "Mom, let's be real. You'd collapse halfway through the airport. You need to stick to things that are safe." The room went quiet. I smiled, but something inside me cracked a little deeper. Even my hobbies were taken from me. When I tried to join a local knitting group, Sarah insisted it was too far. When I asked to take a watercolor class at the community center, Kevin told me, "You're already busy enough." Busy with what? The truth was I spent most of my days sitting by the window, reading the same books I'd read a dozen times, watching the mailman, watering the same two potted plants. They bought me a rocking chair. "Last Christmas, you can rest more now," they said, as if I were just waiting to die. I tried to explain once that I still felt like me inside, that my heart beat just as fast when I saw the ocean on TV, that my dreams hadn't expired just because my bones ached. But they just patted my hand and said, "You've had a good life, Mom. Just relax. Relax." That word started to feel like a prison. The worst moment came in the spring. I'd been planning to attend my best friend Martha's funeral across the state. I told Sarah I wanted to take the bus and stay overnight. She stared at me like I'd lost my mind. "You're not going. You'll get sick. You'll get lost. You'll fall. Do you want to end up in the hospital again?" "I was in the hospital for a stomach bug," I said quietly. "That was 2 years ago." She folded her arms. "I'm not letting you do something that risky. Period." Letting me? I felt like a child again, but this time not the cherished kind, just someone in the way. They didn't see it, but they'd begun planning a life around me, not with me. I wasn't included. I was accounted for like a fragile item on a shelf. And maybe the worst part, I started to believe them. I stopped walking as far. I stopped speaking up when I disagreed. I even started questioning whether I'd actually imagined my old strength. Maybe I was fragile. Maybe I was a burden. But then, just as that last crack was about to split me in two, I found that photo album, and with it, a question louder than all their doubts. What if they're wrong about me? Delivering the emotional punch, eviction, control, manipulation, heartbreak. The envelope came on a Tuesday, a thin white rectangle tucked between a utility bill and a coupon flyer. It looked harmless, just one of those standard administrative envelopes. No one expects their life to change with something so ordinary. But when I opened it, the world tilted. Notice of guardianship petition filed by Sarah L. McMillan. And there it was, black ink on white paper. My daughter was petitioning the court to become my legal guardian. I read it 3 times. My hands trembled so violently that I had to sit down. Each word felt like a betrayal stitched in legal jargon: cognitive decline, impaired judgment, inability to manage financial or medical affairs independently. None of it was true. None of it. But on paper, it looked convincing. My own daughter, my blood, was telling the state that I could no longer be trusted with my own life. I called her immediately. My voice was shaking. "Sarah, what is this?" There was a long pause on the other end, then a sigh. "Mom, I didn't want you to find out like that." Then how was I supposed to find out? I asked, my throat tight. "When a judge hands me over like property?" "It's not like that," she said in that soft, clinical tone she used when patients were about to panic. "It's for your own good. You've been struggling. You forget things. You don't always take your meds. And you talk about traveling alone, moving, selling your things. It's not safe." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Because I want to live, I'm now unfit." She didn't answer that. Instead, she said, "It's temporary, just until things stabilize." Kevin agrees. We already talked to the lawyer. They had done all this behind my back. My son, my daughter, the 2 people I sacrificed everything for, decided that my voice no longer mattered. I hung up without saying goodbye. That night, I sat in the kitchen, staring at the guardianship form. I didn't cry. I couldn't. The pain was too strange, too hollow, like standing in your own home and realizing all the furniture has been moved while you were asleep. The next morning, Sarah showed up with Kevin. They walked in like social workers, not children. Sarah sat across from me, folded her hands, and Kevin stayed by the doorway, arms crossed. "Mom," she began, "we're worried. You left the stove on last week. You forgot your eye appointment. You told the neighbor you were planning to hike in the Rockies." "I never said that." "You said something like it." They had a list Literal bullet points of concerning behavior. Things that would never raise an eyebrow if I were 40, but at 71 suddenly meant I was losing it. I also fixed the broken railing last week, I said, and called the insurance company myself and beat Kevin at Scrabble. Kevin looked down. Sarah didn't flinch. That's not the point, Mom. The point is we need to be proactive. We can't wait until something really bad happens. And what gives you the right to take over my life? You gave us that right, Sarah said. All the times you leaned on us. We're just trying to keep you safe. There it was again. Safe. That four-letter word they use like a leash. I stood up. If you're trying to help me, then start listening. I'm not sick. I'm not helpless. I'm not your patient. Sarah's eyes softened, but not in the way I wanted. It was the look people give to someone they've already written off. Mom, please don't fight this. She slid the paper across the table, a pen on top. If you sign it voluntarily, we can make sure it stays private. No court dates, no judge. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a corner painted in warm colors. Kevin finally spoke. It's just a formality, Mom. We'll still let you make some choices. We just need to handle the complicated stuff. Let me make choices. As if my life were a privilege to be rationed. I stared at that paper like it might burst into flames. My fingers itched to rip it in half, but instead, I stood slowly, carefully, and walked to the door. Get out. Mom, out. They hesitated, waiting for me to fold, to wobble, to forget. But I didn't. I looked them both in the eye and repeated myself, get out. They left in silence. That night, I locked my doors for the first time in years. Not because I was scared of strangers, but because I finally understood what betrayal looked like. It wore familiar faces. It smelled like Sunday dinner. It called you Mom and told you to rest. A few days later, I received a letter from the bank. The joint account Kevin had set up was now under administrative hold. All withdrawals required. My money was being managed like a monthly allowance. When I called the number on the letter, the woman on the line said, "Well, ma'am, since your son is listed as co-owner, he has full rights to protect the account if he suspects elder fraud." Elder fraud, like I was some confused old woman wiring funds to Nigerian princes. My blood ran cold. That weekend, I overheard two women at church whispering about me near the coffee urn. Such a shame. She used to be so sharp. But they say her daughter had to step in. It's probably for the best. For the best. That phrase haunted me more than anything because it sounded gentle, responsible, kind, but it wasn't. It was the velvet glove over the iron fist of control. The final straw came the next week. I'd planned to visit the small lake cabin my husband and I once rented during our first year of marriage. It had been decades, but I called the owner, still the same man, and arranged to rent it for 3 days. I wanted to sit by the water, to think, to breathe. When I told Sarah, her face went blank. I canceled the reservation, she said flatly. I told the man you have medical conditions that make solo travel dangerous. My mouth opened, but no words came. You what? You shouldn't be going alone. You don't think clearly sometimes, and it's just too risky. I stared at her. You had no right. I had every right, she snapped. I'm not going to sit back and watch you spiral just because you want to pretend you're 30 again. That was when I realized they didn't just want to protect me, they wanted to erase me. The real me, the independent, curious, sharp-witted woman was inconvenient. And so they'd wrapped her in blankets and rocking chairs and soft voices until even I questioned whether she ever existed at all. But she did. And she was still in there. Beneath the shame, the control, the heartbreak, a fire was smoldering. They thought they'd won, but they had no idea Judith Pearson was about to rise. The house was quieter than it had ever been. Not the peaceful kind of quiet like in winter when snow blankets the roof and everything outside seems to hush in reverence. No, this was the kind of quiet that presses in on your chest, the kind that echoes off the walls with every memory. For days, I didn't open the curtains. I didn't want to see the neighborhood or the sunlight or the mail carrier with his chipper wave. I just wanted silence, maybe to disappear for a while. The only sound that lingered was the ticking of the kitchen clock. Each second felt like a reminder of how still my life had become. I would sit in my favorite chair, the same one I'd nursed both Sarah and Kevin in, and just sit for hours. No television, no books, just silence and memory. I kept thinking about the time Kevin broke his leg when he was 12. He'd been riding his bike down the hill too fast. I stayed with him the entire night in the hospital, holding his hand through the pain. I remembered Sarah at her college graduation. Her cap sat crooked on her head, but she looked so proud. I'd sold my wedding ring to pay her last semester's tuition. She never knew that I gave them everything. Everything. And now they had filed papers, locked away my bank account, canceled my travel plans, and worse, stripped me of something you can't put in a form: dignity. That was the real ache. Not the money, not the canceled cabin trip, but the dawning realization that somewhere along the way I had stopped being me in their eyes. I had become a liability, not a mother, not a woman, just a checklist. And yet I couldn't stop loving them. That was the cruel part. I had taught them to be responsible, to plan, to be safe. I raised them to protect what they loved. I just never thought they'd use those lessons against me. One morning, I found myself standing in front of the hallway mirror. I hadn't looked in a long time. The woman staring back at me looked older than I remembered, but not weak. There was still something in her eyes, something sharp, quiet, watchful. I leaned closer and whispered, "Do you even know who you are anymore?" My reflection didn't answer, but I did remember who I was. I was the girl who read poetry under the stars at age 16, the woman who backpacked through New Mexico before meeting Thomas, the mother who held 2 jobs and still made pancakes from scratch every Sunday. Where had that woman gone? Had I buried her in responsibility? Had I allowed motherhood to swallow the rest of me? There were days when I almost called Sarah, days when I stared at the phone hoping she would apologize, hoping this had all been a misunderstanding, that she'd cry and say, "I'm sorry, Mom. I forgot who you are." But that call never came. Instead, I got another reminder in the mail, a formal court notice, a hearing date, my daughter's signature stamped neatly at the bottom. That was the moment something in me shifted. Not a big bang, not some Hollywood-style epiphany, just a flicker like a match lighting in a dark room. Maybe I couldn't stop the hearing. Maybe I couldn't reverse what had been done. But maybe, just maybe, I could still choose something. My whole life I had waited for kids to grow up, waited for Thomas to finish projects, waited for permission to live boldly. And now, at 71, I was being told I'd waited too long, that my time was up, that my life had been moved behind glass like an antique vase, something to look at, not use. That's when I made myself a promise. If they thought I was fragile, if they thought I needed protecting, if they believed I had nothing left to give the world, then I would prove them all wrong. Not with anger, not with lawyers, but with action. The world hadn't shut me out. They had, but the world was still out there, still turning, still full of wild, wonderful, unpredictable things. And I still had legs that worked, a mind that was clear, and a heart that wasn't done beating with wonder. So I took out a notebook and I wrote just 4 words: buy a one-way ticket. It wasn't a plan. Not yet, just an idea. But ideas, I remembered, are dangerous things, especially when. I closed the notebook and set it on the nightstand. Tomorrow the fight would begin, but tonight I slept peacefully for the first time in weeks. The morning sunlight filtered through the dusty blinds, casting thin stripes across the floor. I sat by the kitchen table, a steaming cup of tea warming my hands. And for the first time in weeks, I let myself breathe. Not the shallow breaths of anxiety, but something slower, deeper. The silence was no longer empty, it was a canvas. Just the day before, I had found myself paging through an old photo album, one I hadn't touched since the kids moved out years ago. I lingered on a picture from my 30th birthday, a surprise party thrown by Thomas and the kids in our tiny Michigan home. I was smiling, truly smiling, surrounded by faces full of laughter and love. How had it gotten so different? In that moment, something inside me stirred, a quiet, steady flame of memory and possibility. I wasn't just a frail old woman. I was Judith Pearson, a woman who had once crossed the country with nothing but a backpack and a dream. A woman who had loved fiercely, fought hard, and survived storms I hadn't even told anyone about. And if I was still here, still breathing, maybe there was more ahead of me yet. That afternoon, I went for a walk around the block. The neighborhood felt both familiar and strange. Cars passed by without notice. The kids on the street were different now, but the maple trees still lined the sidewalks just like they always had. A young woman with a toddler smiled at me as I passed. She said, "Good morning, Mrs. Pearson." Her kindness was small but real. It reminded me that the world still held gentle spaces, even when your own family felt like strangers. When I returned home, I sat at my desk and opened the notebook I had started days ago. For simple words stared back at me, buy a one-way ticket. It felt daring just to write it down. Could I really do it? Could I really leave everything behind and travel alone at my age, when everyone said I was too fragile, too vulnerable? The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. I pulled out a map of the world, something I had kept from my days as a school librarian, and spread it across the table. I traced my finger over places I dreamed of seeing: the lavender fields of Provence, the bustling markets of Marrakesh, the serene temples of Kyoto. The plan wasn't to run away, it was to reclaim myself. I'd spent too long living in the shadows of other people's expectations, their fears, their limitations. No more. I promised myself that I would book a ticket, pack light, only what I truly needed, write letters to Sarah and Kevin explaining nothing but letting them know I was still alive, still me. Find ways to keep my mind sharp and my body strong, rediscover joy. It was a small plan, but it was mine. That night, as I prepared for bed, I looked at myself in the mirror again. The woman who looked back wasn't fragile. She was weathered, yes, scarred perhaps, but there was steel. In her spine now, a quiet determination. I whispered, "You're not done yet." The next morning, I made the call. A kind voice on the other end connected me with a travel agent who specialized in solo senior travelers. She was patient and encouraging, answering every question I had, some I hadn't even thought to ask. When the booking was finally made, I felt a rush of emotion, fear, excitement, hope, all tangled up like a knot in my chest. But beneath it all was one clear truth: I was taking back my life. Because sometimes the biggest battles start quietly, not with shouting or fury, but with a single brave decision to step forward. The days that followed felt like walking a tightrope, balanced between fear and freedom, between the old world and the new. I told no one about the ticket I bought or the contacts I made. Not Sarah, not Kevin, not even Thomas. If they thought I was fragile, if they thought I needed their permission or protection, I would prove them wrong. Not by confrontation, but by moving quietly beneath their radar. The first step was the will. I reached out to a trusted attorney, someone who had been a friend of the family for years, but had always shown me respect, not pity. I told her simply, I want to change my will. I want to make sure my estate doesn't end up in the hands of those who would see me as a burden. She nodded with understanding, never questioning me. Together, we rewrote the document. The house, the savings, even the small cabin by the lake, all would be left to those who had stood by me, my longtime friend Joan, the local library where I had volunteered for decades, and a shelter for women in need. Sarah and Kevin were mentioned only once in a clause that reflected my disappointment, but also my hope that one day they might understand. Next came the hardest part: selling the house. It was the place I had raised my family, the house that had held birthdays, Christmas mornings, and first steps. But it was also a prison now. I contacted a real estate agent who specialized in discreet sales, someone who understood the need for privacy. We agreed on a plan to list the home quietly and without fanfare. I packed only what mattered: photos, keepsakes, a few pieces of furniture I couldn't bear to part with. As I boxed up the memories, I felt a strange mixture of grief and relief. The past was ending. The future was beginning. But the hardest part came when Sarah found the packing boxes stacked in the garage. Her eyes filled with shock, then anger. "What are you doing, Mom?" she demanded. I looked at her calmly. "I'm making sure I have a future that belongs to me." She scoffed. "You're throwing everything away." "No," I said quietly, "I'm taking back what's mine." She stormed out, slamming the door behind her. I didn't chase her because this was my journey, not theirs. In the weeks before my departure, I stayed busy with quiet preparations. I researched every detail of my first destination, Lisbon, Portugal, and learned about the local customs, the language, and the best neighborhoods. Solo travelers my age, I signed up for a yoga class at the community center to keep my body strong. I practiced packing and unpacking, honing the skill of traveling light. All the while, I kept a low profile, avoiding family arguments and the heavy questions I wasn't ready to answer. The day I left, I slipped out before dawn. No goodbyes, no tears, just a small suitcase, a backpack, and a heart full of cautious hope. As I drove to the airport, I felt the weight of years lift from my shoulders. The miles ahead were unknown and vast, but so was the strength I had rediscovered inside me. I was no longer fragile. I was free. The news of my departure spread faster than I had expected. Sarah called first, her voice shaking with disbelief. "Mom, you can't just leave like this. We're family." I listened quietly, the knot of old hurt twisting inside me. "Yes, we are," I said softly. "But sometimes family doesn't mean what we think it means." Her tone turned sharper. "You're being selfish. You don't understand what you're doing." I had tried for years to explain that I wasn't asking for permission anymore. I was making a choice. Kevin followed with a message hours later, alternating between pleading and anger. "You don't need to do this alone. We just want what's best for you. You're throwing everything away." The same tired lines I'd heard for years. But the power had shifted. I was no longer the one begging for their respect or approval. I was the one setting the terms. Joan, my friend and confidant, told me Sarah had hired a lawyer to contest the will and put a hold on the house sale. "They're desperate," Joan said. "They don't want you to win this." I wasn't surprised, but I was ready. I gave my attorney full power of attorney to manage the legal battles quietly. The family's attempts to manipulate the process only exposed their true intentions. In a way, it was a relief. The mask had fallen away. The family gatherings I once dreaded were replaced by silent phone calls, awkward messages, and the heavy weight of things unsaid. Then came the apology from Kevin's wife, a message dripping with guilt but lacking real understanding. "I'm sorry for everything that's happened. We never wanted to hurt you." I chose not to respond. Apologies without change were empty. For the first time in decades, I felt the space to breathe without obligation or fear. The dynamic between us had flipped. No longer the fragile mother to be controlled, I was now the architect of my own life. The strength I had found was not just in travel or legal papers. It was in reclaiming my voice, in choosing dignity over dependence, and in knowing that some relationships, no matter how painful, can only be healed from a distance. It was a cold gray afternoon when I finally agreed to meet them. The cafe was halfway between their home and mine, a neutral ground, or so I hoped. Sarah arrived first, her eyes red-rimmed but guarded. Kevin followed, carrying an air of reluctant acceptance. I looked at them both quietly, feeling the weight of years of love and disappointment. I took a slow breath and began. "I never wanted this to come between us," I said softly. "I only wanted to live a life where I am seen, heard, and respected." Sarah's lip trembled. "We thought you were too fragile. We wanted to protect you." "Protect me?" I repeated, voice steady but firm. "By locking me away in a life I didn't choose? By treating me like a burden instead of a person?" Kevin looked down. "We made mistakes." "Yes," I said. "But mistakes don't excuse everything. The silence, the dismissals, the betrayal of trust." I pulled out a copy of the will. This is my decision, my legacy. I chose to give what I have to those who truly care. Their faces fell. But this isn't about money or property, I continued. It's about respect, about dignity, about finally standing up for myself. There was a long pause. Sarah swallowed hard. Is there any way to fix this? To be part of your life again? I looked at her, the sister who had once held my hand through long nights, who now seemed a stranger. I hope you find a way to change, I said quietly. But that's not my burden to carry anymore. I stood, my spine straight, heart steady. The weight that had kept me down for years was finally gone. Sarah reached out hesitantly, then pulled back. Kevin nodded a silent farewell. I walked away from the table, feeling the sharp sting of loss, but also the fierce bloom of freedom. Justice wasn't a court ruling or a public victory. It was reclaiming my story. It was standing tall when they thought I'd fall. It was knowing I was finally enough. The months that followed were filled with small miracles. Lisbon became more than a destination, it became home. The narrow cobblestone streets, the scent of fresh bread from the corner bakery, the friendly nods from neighbors who never asked about my past, only welcomed my presence. I rented a small apartment overlooking the Teju River, where the sunset painted the sky in shades of pink and gold. Every evening, I sat by the window with a cup of tea and watched the world move slowly and beautifully. I learned to navigate markets in broken Portuguese, made friends at the local community center, and even joined a book club where stories from around the world filled the room with laughter and warmth. The freedom I had long dreamed of was no longer a distant hope, it was real. Inside me, the fragile woman they once doubted was gone. In her place stood someone fierce and whole, someone who had taken the hardest path and found herself on the other side. Some days, I still thought of Sarah and Kevin. I wondered if they had learned to see me differently. But the hurt was no longer a chain around my heart. I had traded it for a quiet strength that carried me forward. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I wrote in my journal, "I lost a family, but I found myself." And in those words was both grief and triumph, a story not just of loss, but of rebirth. This was my true journey. Not the miles traveled, but the courage to stand alone and say, I am enough. If you were in Judith's shoes, would you have stayed or taken the brave step to break free? If this story touched your heart, frustrated you, or inspired you, please share your thoughts in the comments below. Your voice matters, and your experiences could help others going through similar struggles. Have you ever faced family challenges where you felt overlooked, misunderstood, or forced to choose your own path? We want to hear your story. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you never miss another powerful, real-life inspired story like Judith's. We read every comment and believe every person deserves respect and a chance to reclaim their life. Until next time, take care of your heart and never let anyone dim your light.